Welcome to The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson, along with our house DJ, Tolliver. And Tolliver, we could do a show this hour about Elon Musk. We could do a show about Gaza. We could do a show about tariffs. There is just so much going on right now.
Jeremy, listen, my birthday is this month, and all I want is the gift of boredom. Please, no more news, man. I can't do it.
Well, I will say actually that we are going to do or have done shows on the topics I just mentioned. But this week, we're going to talk about something that didn't start on January 20th and will not end when President Trump's term ends. That is the threat of natural disasters, hurricanes, tornadoes, floods, droughts, and of course, wildfires. The recent fires in Southern California cost at least 29 people their lives, and damage totals are estimated north of $250 billion. The fires started and spread in an instant because of extremely dry conditions and winds nearing 100 miles per hour. Here's NBC LA reporter Robert Kovacic, who found a man fleeing his home in the Palisades fire. That man was hopping on his bike with two paintings in hand.
This is like a hurricane in the middle of a brush fire. You've got people right there. Is that a homeowner that's trying to leave? Is this your house?
Yeah.
Which is your house?
Yeah, this is our house. Backyard's on fire. I'm out of here.
Oh my gosh. So what happened? Is there anything we can do to help you, sir?
You can take these paintings, I guess. I can't ride with these.
Listen, I'll take them for you. I work at NBC.
Thank you.
I'll make sure you get them.
Just unbelievable. And on that night, the winds were so powerful that firefighters couldn't fly. They couldn't drop water from the air. As you know, many people have criticized the firefighting infrastructure, reservoirs, fire hydrant pressure, available trucks. But as LA County Fire Chief Anthony Maroney explained to 60 Minutes, fire trucks and hydrants are no match for a firestorm like what occurred.
There's not enough fire engines for this. We think we've lost 8,000 structures. So times 3 fire engines each, that requires 26,000 fire engines. I don't think the state of California has 26,000 fire engines.
So whether you live in a place that is threatened by wildfires or hurricanes or tornadoes or droughts or flooding, which by the way is almost everywhere in the U.S., about 94% of Americans live in a county that has gotten FEMA help for disasters since 2011. We want to hear from you. We want to know if you feel you're prepared for a natural disaster or if you think we are as a country. Tolliver, how can people reach us?
You can call us at 8444-MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. Or you can write in at listentothemiddle.com. And you can also comment on our new live stream on YouTube, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitch.
Let's meet our panel. CNN Chief Climate Correspondent Bill Weir is with us. Bill, great to have you on the show.
Jeremy, Tolliver, how are you guys? Good to be with you.
Doing great. And Kim Cobb, director of the Institute at Brown for Environment and Society, is with us as well. Kim, welcome to you.
No, thanks so much for having me.
So before we get to the phones, let's talk about some of the things that have come up because of the wildfires. Bill Weir, you reported on them. There has been criticism, as there is after every natural disaster, about the preparation and response. But this was like a hurricane of fire because of the wind. What more could have been done to prepare?
They're wrestling with that question right now, Jeremy, but I think it starts with imagination. I think we lack the capacity to imagine an urban wildfire in Santa Ana wind season. Typically, those things don't overlap. Last year, there was too much water in Los Angeles. So we're living now on an overheating planet through these periods of weather whiplash where it's too much or not enough. And there was a reservoir near the Palisades that was closed for maintenance. There was a cover that had ripped, and just the unfortuitous timing of that is being investigated as well. But even if that was full, experts tell me it would have maybe saved a few houses around the edges, because once the Palisades and once the homes from Sierra Madre almost to Pasadena became the fuel, and you can't fly, there's nothing ground crews can do. Humans have never stopped a Santa Ana wildfire. You just have to wait for the winds to change and for the weather to break. And so whether it's Lahaina or Paradise, California a couple of years ago, or this one now, which to me was sort of the combination of both of those and then scaled up, it starts with realizing that these are not our father's fires. These are not our grandfather's fires anymore. And the infrastructure we've built, the way we build cities, the way we build fire hydrant systems, has to adapt right now,
Well, and
or
you
else.
don't
And
have
when you think about
another.
right now, Altadena is looking about half of Altadena needs to be put in a landfill, like half of a city. And
Right.
so if landfills can't handle the damage of these, certainly the fire hydrants can't.
When you don't have another city in this country that you have this kind of density right next to just wilderness, hills that are covered in trees and brush and everything else. Kim Cobb, President Trump has blamed water management. He even claimed falsely that there's some sort of valve to turn the water to Southern California on that was turned off. And to prove his point, he told the Army Corps of Engineers to release billions of gallons of water into the farms of Central California that was being saved up for the dry season. But from your perspective, what is the right lesson to learn about water management, forest management from these fires?
Yeah, I mean, California has been a place that has been under acute drought pressure for decades. And that has resulted in a very close coordination of water resources accordingly. So managed by city, but largely state and federal entities who have to make very carefully calibrated decision about how that very precious resource is used. And so, of course, we have heard that there is no pipe linking the water release that Trump let go from those very precious reservoirs, which are designed for emergency use by farmers in the dry summer months. There's no way that that connects to LA. There's simply no connection point. And so this was a massive waste of billions of dollars of water that may be sorely needed and will have damaging effects later on this year. Of course, we can look at the design, as Bill was talking about, of our critical infrastructure that's not designed to respond to our present climate state, let alone of the climate states that we know are coming down the pike under continued warming for at least the next 2 decades. Let's hope we can turn it around before then by reducing fossil fuel emissions. But we are woefully ill-prepared for our climate of now. And that's not just for water resources and emergency firefighting efforts in LA. That is also for coastal cities around the country. We saw Asheville, of course, revisiting some of code decisions and zoning decisions. This is a to Z type of opportunity for us to think critically about what does planning look like for short and long term, and how do we attack emergency planning in response to this climate emergency.
And we're on in Nashville, so I wonder if we're going to hear from somebody who went through Hurricane Helene. Bill Weir, the other thing that's come up from Washington is that FEMA, the Federal Emergency Management Agency, which has been around since the late 1970s, should be done away with. Do people think, and you've been reporting on many of these disasters, do people that you've spoken with think that FEMA is not doing a good job?
Well, it depends on the disaster, depends on the timing. There's sort of this natural 5 stages of grief people go through after their whole life has been upended. And one of those stages is anger. And a lot of times it's anger at the officials, it's the response. There's plenty of people to be angry at in these. But for the most part, I see them bringing critical services at times when they're most needed. And it all comes down to the commanders. It comes down to the boots on the ground, how they do it. I saw really wasteful efforts after Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico, where a runway full of bottled waters was left to rot in the sun because they had no way to distribute it there. But then I've seen other places, disasters where FEMA is right there, and people are really grateful to have them. The idea that states can handle these on their own that's the one that's going to sort of catch a lot of political headwind, because as you were talking about, $250 billion for one set of wildfires. I mean, these are, and when you get into states, in the Gulf states, they can't afford these. Mexico City, Florida, which got hit by Hurricane Michael, I was walking around with the mayor. He said the cleanup would be 10 times his annual budget for this little beachside town. So everybody's got to kick into these in a way that spreads the risk and the pain. But FEMA is not the cavalry. And even I've been hearing this from many FEMA administrators, that the idea that they're going to come riding over the hill and make you whole again is not accurate. They'll get you a head start. But the more prepared, the communities that have the most trust in each other and the science are the ones that come out the most unscathed on the other side. And FEMA is a bonus to them in those cases.
Well, Bill, just to follow on that real quick. Sorry to interrupt, Jeremy. So if FEMA is done away with, what does disaster response look like after that? They're the only government agency I know that deals with that kind of thing.
That's it. It would be state by state, I suppose. I don't, it doesn't
Well,
seem
Trump
like
has talked about just sort of reimbursing the states, but letting them handle everything.
letting them handle it. Sure. But after a hurricane, I will stand on in the Florida Keys or somewhere with this and just watch the line trucks from 50 states come rolling by. Watch the first responders, the fire trucks, the heavy equipment from all over the country. It really is an all hands on deck situation nationally. And there's, mutual aid systems around the country. Maybe those could be propped up with federal funding. I don't know, but it feels like in the middle of, we're being bombarded by these disasters at every front. The idea of gutting FEMA in the middle of this instead of maybe reforming it and trying to prop it up seems counterintuitive.
The three states that have gotten the most money because of disasters are Louisiana, Florida, and Texas, all, of course, in Hurricane Alley, I guess we would call it. Tolliver, this weekend, New Orleans is hosting the Super Bowl, but it was 20 years ago this summer that Hurricane Katrina devastated the city.
Yeah, still the most expensive hurricane in U.S. history. Here's President George W. Bush addressing the nation from New Orleans after the storm.
In the life of this nation, we have often been reminded that nature is an awesome force and that all life is fragile. We're the heirs of men and women who lived through those first terrible winters at Jamestown and Plymouth, who rebuilt Chicago after a great fire and San Francisco after a great earthquake, who reclaimed the prairie from the Dust Bowl of the 1930s. Every time, the people of this land have come back from fire, flood, and storm to build anew.
I had forgotten about the winters at Jamestown, Tolliver.
That one went over my head a little.
Yeah. A reminder, The Middle is available as a podcast in partnership with iHeart Podcasts on the iHeart app or wherever you listen to podcasts. And Tolliver, what are we listening to here?
This is James Blood Ulmer with a song called Katrina. He actually has like a whole concept album about the disaster. And while our government failed Louisiana in that moment, I can't help but, love the beauty that he brought out of that pain. More of your calls coming up on The Middle.
This is The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson. If you're just tuning in, The Middle is a national call-in show. We're focused on elevating voices from the middle, geographically, politically, and philosophically, or maybe you just want to meet in the middle. This hour, we're asking you, are you prepared for the next natural disaster? And are we as a country? And by the way, if you've been through a natural disaster, have you come back from it? Tolliver, what's the number to call in?
It's 8444-MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. You can also write to us at listentothemiddle.com, or you can hit us on social media.
I'm joined by Kim Cobb, director of the Institute at Brown for Environment and Society, and CNN chief climate correspondent Bill Weir. And the phones are lighting up. Let's go to Scotty, who's in Augusta, Georgia. Scotty, welcome to The Middle. Go ahead.
Hello from the rolling Piedmont of East Central Georgia.
So have you been through a natural disaster? Do you feel prepared?
Helene survivor, yes. I was somewhat prepared thanks to getting back into camping, but nowhere near as prepared as I needed to be, and will not be caught in that position again.
What do you mean? How are you not prepared, and how are you prepared now?
Living 250 miles inland and facing a storm that was twice the size of Katrina and a category higher, stronger than it was when it made landfall, it was an unprecedented event and cataclysmic throughout the Southeast, not just where I'm at.
And now what have you done to get yourself better prepared?
Portable power, food and water stores, just communication, plans of action, everything different. 180 turn from what it had been, because we just never expected we would ever have to be dealing with that. Two agencies I've never figured I'd interact with, FEMA and Red Cross, who I used to work for. Now I can't say that. I've interacted with both of them. I never thought I'd be doing that because of a natural disaster here.
And do you feel good about your interaction with them?
I mostly do. I think they got a bad rap on it. I think they're doing, especially in our case, a humongous job and did the best they can. I was always treated well, even though you might have hours and hours wait. They were very helpful and did the most that they could to help you understand the process and get through it.
Scotty, thanks for that call. Kim Cobb, one of the things Scotty brings up there has been reported on recently, which is the fact that these hurricanes are hitting inland, that some of the worst problems that come from them is not happening because of the storm surge. It's happening further inland with flooding.
Well, that's right. And I have to give a shout out to Georgian, somebody who lived in Atlanta recently for 18 years and had to live through some of those hurricanes that made it way too far inland and caused such destruction. And I think you're really alluding to the fact that these are unthinkable coincidences that we're seeing with, fronts converging and extreme rainfall happening in places due to these storms going much further, much wetter than they ever have before. And it's challenging our imagination. We have no lived experience with this kind of climate extreme that's, again, fueled by fossil fuels. Science tells us that these links are very strong. And so I really want to call out what the caller was talking about in terms of individual preparedness. And we also have to recognize the role for science in keeping people safe from these events. We have to rely on the National Weather Service. We take it for granted. We should not in this era. It is under attack as it sits under the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. But paying attention to the science and listening to how extremes are being fueled by climate change and the science of those physical links is a critically important part of challenging your imagination across the Southeast, across the drought and wildfire-stricken Western United States, and even up into New England, where we saw catastrophic flooding in recent years, for example, across Vermont and last year here in Rhode Island, of all places.
Well, and just to push on what you just said about the fact that it's under attack, you're worried about what Elon Musk and his people are doing in terms of going after the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration and what that may mean for our science in weather and climate situations.
Yeah, we already know, for example, that this administration is openly hostile to climate science and climate scientists. They would disregard the threat of global warming and diminish it. And with the drill, baby, drill agenda, charge forward in a world where they can pretend to deny the science of climate change. And it doesn't care who's in the White House. It's going to march forward. It represents a clear and present danger to every single American, to our health and well-being and safety, to our economy and to our national security. And so I think we need to recognize that these are incredible federal servants who have been saving so many lives across these suite of horrific extremes we've all witnessed in recent years. And they deserve a prominent shout out, and they deserve the credit that we all take so for granted.
Let's go to John, who's in Kansas City. John, welcome to the middle. Are you prepared for the next natural disaster?
I am now, but I definitely wasn't 5 years ago when I was hit by a EF3 tornado in the middle of the night in Nashville.
What happened?
And I had about 5 minutes to get the kids to the hallway before it literally was on top of us, and I was laying on top of my 7-year-old daughter as it tried to suck us out of the house. And luckily there wasn't a scratch on us, but all the walls were gone, roof was gone, and it was like a movie scene, and just something you never thought you would go through. And I wasn't ready. And so now, I've made steps to be ready this time.
Well, just tell me quickly, what kind of steps have you made to be ready this time?
When I went to bed that night, I didn't even look at the weather. I didn't pay attention to the weather or anything like that. So now, before I go to bed, I pay attention to the weather. I have an app on my phone that would wake me up because you get that little notification from the weather service saying there's a tornado, but it's not very loud, and it won't necessarily wake you up unless you get one of those apps. So I get one of those apps, and I'm just a lot more knowledgeable about what tornadoes are and when they may occur. So I can get my family to safety sooner. And now we have a basement. So that's good too.
Yeah, always good to have a basement in a tornado situation. John, thank you very much. Bill Weir, we've now just heard from two people who do not live along the coasts and have been dealing with real disasters. Nobody would say to them, well, you shouldn't build your house there again because a tornado might hit it a second time, or, the flooding might come 100 miles inland.
That's interesting. You hear that a lot about managed retreat on the coast. Why are we paying to rebuild these, beach towns? Well, it's everywhere now. It's in the heartland. the science on tornadoes around climate change is the spottiest because they don't spend a lot of time on the ground the way hurricanes. You can study them for a long time. But it seems like the tornado alley is shifting from the Great Plains sort of towards the southeast there. So people in regions who had never thought about that before, it's just something to learn from the wisdom of those folks who have been through it before. And I did a story recently on where are the climate havens. I actually wrote a book to my son about how to live on this planet we broke by accident for him. And it starts with, like, where do you live? What are the places? And there's science that's, scientists who said the 47th parallel, like the north, the line that goes like through Buffalo and Duluth and across to the Pacific Northwest is the sweet spot up there. And there's plenty of fresh water in the Great Lakes and all of that. But then that's no guarantee of what could happen in any of these places. And so it's the Boy Scout motto, be prepared wherever you are.
Mm-hmm. Kim, I had a quick question for you, Jeremy. I'm sorry, I keep jumping because I want to get to socials, but I wanted to ask you. So we're talking about Hurricane Alley. What are some things like infrastructurally that the government can do to prepare people for hurricanes? I know like a lot of these things are already happening, but I just don't know personally, so I would like to know.
Yeah, so I think when we think about the landscape for preparedness, we have to think about the many different layers that have to go into that. So, first you're talking about zoning. Where are we building? How are we leveraging the science of what we know about extremes and the fact that they're getting worse into that infrastructure planning? Again, we can talk about the water resources and out west, or we could talk about flood-prone regions in the southeastern United States. So that goes to zoning. Then you go to code, which is often set, could be set by state or local officials. What standards are we building to? We see some incredible striking examples we all saw about Hurricane Michael ripping through the panhandle of Florida. Some houses left perfectly intact because they were built to a beyond code in recognition of that particular owner being concerned about wind thrusts and storm surge. Survived. So that goes to code, and then we can go to insurance. My goodness, how much is that?
A whole show on that one. Yeah,
yeah, a horror store emerging from the Palisades, of course, and Altadena. People left underinsured by the shifting landscape under their own feet. And so, mark my words, we're going to see more of these kinds of stories. It's going to be a fever pitch. It already is in some of these devastated communities. People are going to be pushed out of generational homes. This is still going to be recalibrating for quite some time. There's a federal role here to play. Of course, there's also state and local roles here to play to keep communities safe and keep people housed, frankly.
One of my favorite stories, if I could jump in, Jeremy, I'm sorry. One of my favorite stories of somebody turning anxiety into action, because Kim brought up Hurricane Michael, was a woman named Annette Rubin, who was an NFL wife. She met her husband, who played for the Seahawks in Seattle, had never been through a hurricane, was a new mom when Michael came. It shook her up so much that the next day she says, I can't do this 6 months a year. What, are you guys crazy? You guys went to bed? What is she was Googling, what is the building code hurricane strength that my house can take? And she realized it was not up to code, even though she was in this brand new house. So with no experience in construction, she went down a rabbit hole looking for what houses survived and what were they made of. And she ended up starting a company that she imported this technology from Italy that uses sprayable stone, basically the kind of gunite that you would use to make a swimming pool. You put it on these insulated panels, and the thing is it can stand 250-mile-an-hour winds. It's bomb-proof. It's earthquake-proof. And she's trying to Florida, where people don't think about this, don't think about shelter in these ways, but insurance is sure thinking about it this way. So market forces are going to force these sorts of ideas. The houses I saw in the Palisades that in the middle of a burned out block look like they're right out of Architectural Digest because they were designed to be fireproof specifically.
Right.
And it's so striking when you see that. And when the more people see that, boy, that architect's phone is ringing off the hook.
Yeah, although I will say one of the things I've been reading is that if you outfit a house to be kind of fireproof, it might actually be the opposite of what you want to deal with earthquakes in the exact same location. Well, that's because wood is good for earthquakes and bad for fires.
And stones.
Let's go to
exactly.
Let's get to a call. Aaron is in Longmont, Colorado. Aaron, welcome to the middle. Go ahead.
Yeah, Yeah, so I'm a disaster volunteer. Also the author of How to Prepare for Everything, and I'm definitely not prepared, mainly because disasters are by their nature overwhelming. If it wasn't overwhelming, we'd call it an inconvenience, not a disaster. One of the frustrations that I experience is the politicians overpromising what FEMA can do. FEMA is designed by public policy to write checks that are too small to too few people too late, and they do a pretty good job of that. And I'm not even being trite. I mean, like, really, truly, it's arguably bad public policy to make the federal government the insurer of all things. But from a humanitarian standpoint, that's kind of stinks.
So what would be your one piece of advice, Aaron, to people listening to this about how they can be more prepared as an emergency volunteer yourself?
So number one, stop preparing for disasters. There are an endless number of disasters, and when we focus on disasters, it creates fear. We can't control the bad things that happen. If we could, we'd make sure bad things didn't happen. Instead, we can prepare for the disruptions they cause. Prepare for the power outage. It doesn't matter what caused it, just prepare for the disruptions. And the second is prepare together. Having a strong social connections is a better indicator of both short-term survivability and long-term resilience than any other single factor, including working infrastructure or a 72-hour kit.
Aaron, thank you. Kim Cobb, what do you think about that?
I think that's very wise. So, you can think about what does it take to have a successful plan. We heard one of the callers talk about the importance of communication networks that are established ahead of time, thinking about how you're going to manage charging devices that may be critical to hearing the latest information, to helping people in your community that need your assistance. So that kind of thing is that social network really rings true from what we've heard of regards to the callers here already. So I think that's a very important take home for folks here.
One thing I read that I think is a great piece of advice is if you have to leave your house in a hurry, grab your laundry basket because you know you like those clothes. You were wearing them before.
Laundry and your cat.
Right.
Just those two.
And your cat. Yes, right. Actually, I was talking to somebody about the fires who said she brought the dog, but the cats could survive on their own if they had to. They'd figure it out. The dog probably wouldn't. Okay. Sally is calling from Asheville, North Carolina. There we go. Sally, I assume you went through Helene.
I did. Yep. We went through the whole 18 days, no electricity, 2 weeks, no water.
Wow.
It was a big surprise. But I just wanted to say I really agree with the previous speaker that, folks here that at least that I know have been so thankful for FEMA. When the National Guard came, finally, were able to come, and the power trucks. People were crying with tears, just so thankful. And I know that we had a pretty good experience with FEMA, but I do agree with the person who said that I think the expectations are too high. I think FEMA has done a great job. I think it would be a huge mistake nationally to end FEMA, and because you just don't know where these things are going to happen. And Asheville was a place where people came for climate refuge. This whole area. So,
right. Yeah.
I think that people have to have realistic expectations for FEMA, but I know that everybody was so appreciative of all the help that came, and there's not a lot of money in some of the areas and communities, and they would not have survived without all that help.
Yeah. Sally, thank you. Bill Weir, it's interesting to hear so many people call in and talk about FEMA, because this is not the conversation that it seems like is going on in Washington about this issue, which could change very fast.
Well, that's the thing. The problem, when one of our major parties, really a plank, it seems, in their platform is to mistrust government. Don't trust these agencies. That's their deep staters or whatever the case may be. You don't want to think about that when your roof is just blown off, or the River Arts District in Asheville is just washed away. And most people are, I have to remind myself in these days that the book Lord of the Flies, which was required reading for us in junior high, was written by a manic depressive racist. Okay. And when a real group of kids were took a boat out and were abandoned on a desert island and were discovered a year later. They had a fully functioning society because we are wired to cooperate, and people want to help in these. And the outpouring, you see the best of human nature. You see some of the worst come out, but that gets the headlines. But the best of human nature is what I like to focus on. Look for the helpers, like Mr. Rogers said.
Look for the helpers. Tolliver, we've been talking about disaster preparedness, but sometimes people don't listen to the warnings.
Yeah, in the case of the tornado that ripped through Joplin, Missouri in 2011, many people ignored them. Here's a clip from a CBS News report.
The sirens sounded, but many people took no action.
That is destroyed.
It was tornado season after all, and residents were apparently desensitized to warnings. It's among the distressing findings from a government panel investigating the 200-mile-an-hour twister that leveled entire neighborhoods.
The wind just took it like that and just turned me about 180 degrees and set me down on the concrete.
Those interviewed felt the warnings didn't pertain to them or sought clarification before taking action, losing precious minutes.
Wow. And of course, there were 2 times during the LA fires when residents got an accidental evacuation alert on their phones. Tolliver, what are we listening to here?
This is Fleetwood Mac with Landslide. Stevie actually performed this recently for California firefighters. She had to flee her home, but here she is. She came back singing, even at her ripe old age of 29. I don't know if I got that right. More of your calls coming up on The Middle.
Children get older, I'm getting older too.
This is The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson. We're also available as a podcast in partnership with iHeart Podcasts on the iHeart app or wherever you listen to podcasts. And this hour, we're asking you whether or not you're prepared for the next natural disaster or whether our country is. You can call us at 844-4MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. Or you can reach out at listentothemiddle.com. My guests are CNN Chief Climate Correspondent Bill Weir and Kim Cobb, Director of the Institute at Brown for Environment and Society. And let's go to Hayden, who's in Cape Coral, Florida. Hayden, welcome to The Middle. Go ahead.
Hello, I'm Hayden. I'm from Cape Coral.
Awesome. And tell us, are you prepared for the next natural disaster?
I feel that my family is well prepared. We've been through about 4 or 5 living where we're at, and we just went through 2 or 3 just this year with Ian and Helene. I think our family is well prepared because our family just bought new hurricane-proof windows for our house, even though our house is 20 years old.
Wow. And you're talking about your family. How old are you?
I just turned 18.
Wow. Okay. So, and you've already been through that many hurricanes in your life. That's amazing.
Yep. My brother was born like 5 or 6 days after Katrina.
Wow. But you feel like you're more prepared now with the kind of the upgrades that your parents have put on the house.
Yes. And I feel that like we have more experience now because we've been through multiple different hurricanes. Even though each hurricane is different, we know what to expect. Do
you feel like you're going to stay, once you are out of the house, are you going to stay in a place that's so prone to hurricanes?
I love Florida, so probably. But if I do decide to stay, I'm probably going to buy a house or a place that's up to code.
Yeah. All right. Hayden, thank you very much for that call. Kim Cobb, it just brings up a lot of things. One of them is that we just hear about how parents are supposed to talk to their kids when there's a disaster that's happening. Obviously, Hayden is 18 there, but what do you make of that and his attitude about this?
Well, it certainly reminds me of my 4 children at home this evening, and the fact that they've inherited this world. I would that it weren't so. I would that we had listened to the science back when it was crystal clear in the 1990s, that fossil fuels were driving warming that would drive this set of climate extremes to worsen it. And here we are. So that's my first and foremost sentiment. And it pains me greatly to think that over the next 20 years, over their lives as young adults, they're going to be witnessing an escalation in these kinds of disasters. But it also reminds me that they actually have been born into this. This is part of their lived experience. We can remember and talk about when we were small, it wasn't like this, and how much that challenges our ability to imagine what's possible with climate change. This generation, they get it because they've lived it and they've lived those headlines, and that's all they know. And so it does give me hope that we can come together, lean into the science of resilience and all that it means for saving lives and protecting our economy today, as well as buttressing for some of those worst case scenarios that might come to be by mid-century. So that's really just my hope, and that caller helps me understand what's at risk, but also the fact that this generation is ready and that we owe it to them. To do all we can to leverage the vast trove of treasure of science that we have to protect them and our economy and our security.
Let's go to Nate, who's in Milwaukee. Nate, welcome to the middle. Go ahead. Are you prepared for the next natural disaster?
Oh, hi. Thank you for having me. I would say that living in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, I'm lucky enough not to be in the line of a lot of hurricanes. I was out in Boy Scouts during when the funnel cloud went over the campsite, though, so that was certainly an interesting experience to live through. And you got to work with people in order to get through that. One of the things I would say, and I appreciate that she mentioned fossil fuels, considering that global warming is partly their fault, each of these disasters that happens, fossil fuels should be paying to help clean up, or fossil fuel companies.
Interesting point, Nate. Bill Weir, what about that?
Well, he is not alone. And Nate, you're in my hometown of Milwaukee. So good to hear, Ascani. There are dozens of lawsuits winding their way through courts, tribals, courts, cities, states, counties, for just that, suing big oil in some cases for basically false advertising, for hiding the hidden dangers of their products, and while claiming that they didn't know any better. And the idea is to use those settlements, the way the tobacco settlement was used for education and health, public health, that those settlements would be used to fortify the city of Charleston, South Carolina, is the one sort of spot in the red state that is suing, with the hope that they'll help pay for the $1 billion seawall they want to build to protect the historic quarter of that city there. So that could be the next big, because it doesn't look like it's happening in the legislature, and the hope that the private sector was going to take this on has kind of blown up in the last couple of weeks. So now there's a lot of hope. The Supreme Court sort of indicated that they might take up this Hawaii case that is in this space. And if they had killed it, it would kill all the rest of them, would set a precedent then. That's what big oil is hoping for. But so far, all of those motions have been denied.
Mm-hmm. Ruth is calling from Cincinnati. Ruth, welcome to the middle. Go ahead.
Well, thank you. All right. I am old and I was nervous. And in where I live, we have something called crisis, and resilience is the whole way to do things. The first thing, told you I'm old. The first thing is that I have a to-go bag that I've been putting together, so it has enough food and water. I grab all the meds that I have too. Don't want to forget the meds when you're old or when you're young. Food, water, clothing. Probably I haven't gotten it yet, but something to. That if there were a fire, I could just put one of those little blankety things on. Yes, it costs a bit of money to put that together. I want to have the little pills so that if the water gets contaminated, I can make the water so I could drink it, because I couldn't have enough. Anyway, then the other thing we do is we have ways to communicate, a ham radio. We got to know who in the neighborhood has one, or walkie-talkie. We also want to work together and know who's old and who needs help.
Mm-hmm.
Or who's got animals that get them out of there. Not that animals, or certainly children or young people, any kind of people that need help. And the thing that happens with all of those things work together is I don't feel anxious like I used to. I don't have to think about the disaster. I'm getting prepared. I haven't gotten it together yet. But that makes me feel more calm and more like I can do something. And it helps tremendously for me not to feel so anxious. One other thing, if you have an electric car charger on your land, on your little property, and I live in the city, so, but if you have that, you can use your electric car. Somehow there's a way to connect to that charger to get electricity to do other things.
Get the electricity out of it. Exactly. Ruth, it sounds like you're very prepared. So thank you very much. I'm very happy about that.
I learned a lot. Yeah.
I did. Yes. Kim Cobb, what do you take away from that? I will say, just on the issue of charging, when I worried that the power was going to go out in the fires, I was like, oh, at least I have my computer. I can use that to charge my phone as well when the phone dies. I didn't realize, of course, that the hot water would be gone too. So then there's no shower. It's like there's a lot of things you don't think about. But anyway, go ahead. Your thoughts.
Yeah, I mean, I think that caller certainly thought through a lot of the different layers that need to be in place to get yourself safely through a disaster. And I love the call out to keeping the community safe, to thinking about those more vulnerable members of the community. And, we've talked a lot about flooding, but extreme heat is something we haven't touched on. Killed hundreds of people in the Pacific Northwest a couple of years ago, as we probably all remember. And in those instances, those are isolated, largely elderly folks who don't have access to the kind of communication channels that many of us, click into with our phones. And that's the kind of people that we have to be looking out for in these moments. So I love that call out. And I wanted to mention, of course, the only way I got my husband to sign off on solar panels on my roof was for the resilience aspects, that during a power outage, we'd have enough power to hold our lower power devices and keep going. So that's a good reason to think about the renewable energy component here.
Bill Weir, on the issue of sort of helping out your neighbors, as you've talked to people who've been through these disasters, how much of a responsibility do people feel once they've figured out how to get themselves out of harm's way? Do they go and knock on every door in the neighborhood and make sure everybody else is doing the same?
Yeah, I met some guys up in Arcadia who stayed and fought the fires with buckets essentially, but they were there and they saved several homes on their block. One thing struck me about that last caller, who was she Ruth, who was so thorough and thought through it. Yeah. I went up to Paradise 5 years after that amazingly deadly fire up there, and 2/3 of the town never came back, but the third that's there really wants to be there. And they are the most galvanized, tightest community, and they want to do it right. They know how to want to build around fire, live with fire in this ecosystem. They have a new awareness. But I met this woman who rebuilt, and she gets together with all the other neighbors that are in her evacuation zone. It's their, whatever the number is, Zone 125 Club. They meet a couple times a month. They have a potluck. Wow. And the neighborhoods that do that in advance, that's just a good reason to meet neighbors you didn't know you had. Like, hey, everybody, we're getting together on an evacuation zone to talk things through. Who's got the generator? Who's got the solar panels? And wow, that goes so far. And yes, checking on your neighbors, knowing who's there. And also one I sent a new, just practical idea in addition to charging you're thinking about. There's a company called BioLite that now sells a camp stove or a grill that converts that heat into a phone charge or a laptop charge. So while you're cooking your food or making your coffee, you can be charging your phone. And if we start thinking about energy in those terms, the thermal heat that we waste, but that could be, certainly gathered and used, especially in a pinch. There's so many ideas out there like that.
Tolliver, some comments coming in online.
Potluck. Reggie in Rolla, Missouri says, we're nowhere near prepared. Having worked on 2 FEMA teams, I can say that we as a nation are not even close. FEMA has resources that are available to them that are not available at a state level at all. And then Ryan in Pittsburgh says, for my parents' generation, it was the specter of nuclear war that dominated questions of, are you prepared? But now it appears that climate change is the existential threat that commands the attention of those thinking how to be prepared.
You can again reach out to us at listentothemiddle.com or on social media. And Matthew is calling from Durham, North Carolina. Matthew, welcome to the middle. Your thoughts?
Hi, thanks for having me on. The one thing I wanted to say on here is that, I was in my PhD program when Hurricane Harvey hit in Houston. And during that, learning the process, also trying to finish grad school and all of that. The big thing that we have now that I'm actually in industry as an engineer is that we have hundreds of millions of dollars of projects. A lot of studies have been done. A lot of them are sitting on shelves. And I think this was mentioned a little earlier as well, is that there's millions, if not, well, most of the time, billions of dollars of projects and ideas and things that could get done, but nobody wants to fund them. And there's no money to fund them. You're talking about, cities in East Texas that, hey, $100 million project could save 100,000 houses, but where are they going to get $100 million when their annual budget's in the single million, right? It's a matter of, and it was mentioned before that 18-year-old was really inspiring, but the thing that we're doing is basically continuing to kick the can for preparedness and readiness in terms of how we're building, how we're designing, how we're planning, and we're at a point where we are well sunk, right? FEMA spends way more money on natural disaster recovery than they do on grants to mitigate and prevent.
To prepare.
And it's been that way, grossly escalating each year. And I think we just need to take this conversation to say that, we haven't invested in infrastructure since the 1950s in that manner. And we really need to revamp a lot of these aging systems, aging codes, aging planning methods so that we can actually get ahead into the 2030s, 2050s.
Yeah, Matthew, thank you. Kim Cobb, a great point I want to bring to you is, people have said, let's just take the case of Hurricane Sandy back in New York 10 years ago or 12 years ago. They said if they'd spent, tens of billions of dollars putting gates in the harbor, they would have saved much more money from the flooding that occurred and caused all the kinds of trouble. You could say this in many of these disasters.
Yeah, pay now or pay 100 times later. That's the bottom line the caller was getting at. And it's so true. And so what I want to leave folks with is also the idea that you can be advocates for resilience planning within your township and your city. You can demand that these plans consider the latest and greatest science and identify where these investments are most critical to protect property and lives and economies. You can advocate at the state level. Every state should have a state resilience officer and a state resilience plan that is using the science and service to the public good. And of course, we can recognize the federal opportunities for investments in resilience. We may not believe about solar panels and windmills, but I think we can all get behind the federal government making strategic, cost-effective investments in keeping communities safe from these worsening climate extremes. And those are places where people can leverage their voice for good. It's not just enough to work on an individual home by home level. We have to begin to get the plans in place at local, state, and federal levels to protect ourselves as much as possible from the damages that are here and will worsen going forward.
Bill Weir, I'm going to give you the last word because we are running out of time this hour. And let me ask you this. Maybe this is a slightly positive note. We are obviously dealing with a lot of devastation from these disasters around the country, and losing a home is terrible, and losing your stuff and your memories is terrible. But are we getting better at keeping the death toll down in these disasters, that people are getting the warnings and should we, getting out of harm's way?
Yeah, so if you look at the statistics over the last century, even as storms have intensified, thanks to emergency warning systems, thanks to great medicine, those casualty rates go down. But at a certain point, you can't adapt fast enough. If the earth changes beyond our capacity to adapt, then that's when things get really rough. But yes, I look at the devastation in Los Angeles County, and I was shocked that the casualties, the fatalities were in the double digits. I thought for sure they'd be in the hundreds, given but people heeded the warnings. They got out in time. Not enough, sadly. The people who were lost, but we are getting better at that, but only to a point, right? And then when the disasters get too big. But I like to think about it from the old Psychology 101 days of Maslow's pyramid of needs. If you remember that, at the bottom of the pyramid, the stuff that keeps us alive: air, water, proper temperature. The second layer, which is shelter and information and economy. I took all of those for granted when I was growing up. And now I'm talking to my kids about what is in our air? Where does our water come from? Think about our food chain. Do we have 6 hours of power? if we need it, if everything goes black.
Yeah.
And it's just a shift in mindset. And then we can get the top of the pyramid, the love and esteem needs that we can't imagine getting from therapy and social media by plugging in with our neighbors, leaning into nature and each other around community and resilience.
That is a perfect way to end the hour. I want to thank my guests, CNN Chief Climate Correspondent Bill Weir and Kim Cobb, Director of the Institute at Brown for Environment and Society. Thank you both so much.
This is great.
And
my
next
pleasure.
week, Tolliver, we're going to be talking about something that's been in the news a lot lately. That is cryptocurrency like Bitcoin and whether it actually has any value to society at all.
Just in time for the launch of Middlecoin. I got a good feeling about this, man. Middlecoin's going to be huge. As always, you can call in at 8444-MIDDLE. That's 844-464-3353. Or you can reach out to listentothemiddle.com. You can also sign up for our newsletter there. Don't forget to check out our new video podcast on youtube.com, where you can watch us as well as hear us.
The Middle is brought to you by Long Nook Media, distributed by Illinois Public Media in Urbana, Illinois, and produced by Harrison Patino, Danny Alexander, Sam Burmistaz, John Barth, Annika Deschler, and Brandon Condritz. Our technical director is Jason Croft. Thanks to the more than 420 public radio stations that are making it possible for people across the country to listen to The Middle. I'm Jeremy Hobson, and I will talk to you next week.